Well, good afternoon, everyone. We're just going to wait a few minutes and let folks that were in the lobby kind of trickle in, and we'll get started here in a few minutes. And for those of you who have just joined, we're just giving it a few minutes for folks to come in from the lobby here, and we'll get started in about another 60 seconds or so. Okay. Well, Grant, if it's okay with you, my friend, let's go ahead and get this show started.
Looking forward to it. This is going to be great.
Good. All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar about the aerospace sector here in Greater Albuquerque and indeed within the state of New Mexico as well. By way of introduction, my name is Chad Matheson, Vice President for Economic Competitiveness here at the Albuquerque Regional Economic Alliance. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Grant Taylor, who leads the business development on behalf of the organization.
Greetings, everyone.
I am going to go ahead and share the presentation on my end, and we will go ahead and get started. So just on the front end, a little bit of a housekeeping. You all might be aware who are attending, this webinar is being recorded, and we will certainly share it out to the group at the conclusion of the webinar itself. In addition, we thought we'd provide just a little bit of a roadmap for today's discussion. We'll start out by kind of teeing up the macroeconomic sense of the aerospace sector across the landscape of the state, and then we'll drill in more deeply here with the regional attributes. We'll pivot and talk through some of the talent dynamics, both from an experienced personnel perspective as well as the student population. And then we'll offer up a comparative look at an operational cost comparison for a high-tech aerospace computer systems and design firm. I'll then kick it over to Grant for some comments on both the targeted resources that both the locale and the state have as tools for growth for aerospace specific companies. And then as always, offer an invitation to connect in more detail after the conclusion of the webinar itself. So to begin, talking about some of the broad-based macro innovation landscape that exists within the state of New Mexico itself. And as you can see on the left-hand slide, the left-hand side of the slide, the state itself is home to 3 Air Force bases, 3 national labs, and actually 5 aerospace testing facilities with access to the restricted airspace. And interestingly enough, the Greater Albuquerque region is home to 3 of these statewide assets. They include the Kirkland Air Force Base, the Air Force Research Lab, and Sandia National Labs. But importantly, while there exists density of these state level assets here within the region, there is in close proximity to the region the other state level assets that firms considering or expanding in the region have access to. Uh, an hour and a half north, we have the Los Alamos National Lab. And towards the south, we have those unique testing facilities that offer restricted airspace to firms who are performing research and development and testing capabilities. One of which, of course, is Spaceport America, which is about 2.5 hours south of downtown Albuquerque itself. So as we think about the innovation landscape and what that means for growth within industries which complement the aerospace cluster at large, we begin to wonder, well, what is job distribution around the state within these specific industries? And something that was uncovered recently, that as it relates to these aerospace industries, Bernalillo County actually holds the highest share of jobs within the state of New Mexico itself, accounting for over 15,500 jobs within the county alone, which represents about 50% of statewide employment. Now, interestingly, when we index job growth within these industries over the past decade, you can very cleanly see that there's a unique specialization, there's a unique growth dynamic happening here within the Greater Albuquerque region, certainly compared to the state at large, as well as the United States. So cumulatively, over the past decade, aerospace industries have expanded nearly 20% in jobs. This outpaces the 10.5% within the state, as well as the nearly 7.5% at the national level as well. So what might be some of those unique elements of the regional economy and the state economy that are really a driving force to catalyze growth, job growth in these unique aerospace sectors? And certainly we all might be very well aware of the two directorates that live within the Air Force Research Lab itself. The Space Vehicles Directorate, which really serves as that center of excellence for research and development, an area for which we hold a significant specialization. And interestingly, regionally, this operates on nearly 440,000 square feet of laboratory and office space and supports over 50 state-of-the-art research labs. In addition, the Directed Energy Directorate, operating on 4,300 acres of land and nearly 900,000 square feet of laboratory and office space. So when you think about the elements that are driving specialization of intellectual capital and development, certainly we have top-line support from federal investment into these unique research and development areas. Now, in addition, as we mentioned earlier, just to the south, Spaceport America is operating on 6,000 square miles of restricted airspace, for which, as you can imagine, an entity or a business expanding in the Greater Albuquerque region or is considering an investment into the Greater Albuquerque region from outside of the market can tap into the intellectual capital base of the region and then have direct asset to assets more broadly to test both vertically and horizontally the components and the vehicles for which they are producing within the regional marketplace. So looking at it from a state level, kind of that macroeconomic 30,000 foot level, and then drilling it down into more of a county level, we also want to understand where density exists inside of, in this instance, the county itself. And what we can see when we look at and evaluate operational function, if you will, industries that complement the aerospace sector at large, interesting density emerges around some critical assets that we have located within the region. Certainly down there in the kind of bottom right, that colorful cluster, if you will, that is the Sandia Science and Technology Park. And there is not only significant presence of private industry, but there are also in close proximity to those federal assets and those intellectual capital assets that exist within the market. At the same time, that cluster kind of down there on the bottom left, there is a unique element inside the University of New Mexico known as COSMIAC and the UNM Aerospace Department, where there again exists strong density of private industry leveraging educational and educational partnerships to really, again, tap into that intellectual capital base that exists not only within the Sandia Science and Tech Park and the Air Force Research Lab, but also the pipeline into the University of New Mexico. Now, interestingly, that one kind of up top there, the top and to the right, that's actually a business park. It's an office park. But it's an office park for which there exists density of aerospace related and tech firms that again highlights the importance of the clustering effect and how industries from a more detailed perspective support the aerospace cluster at large. These can include specific elements related to research and development. These can include specific elements related to cybersecurity or custom computer programming or engineering services at the same time. So again, as we begin to understand the density and the specialization that exists within Bernalillo County that supports the largest share of jobs within the whole state, it does us well to understand how they're distributed and around which assets they are located in close proximity to, so that we can best understand the dynamics that are going on there from a local market perspective. But even more importantly, as it relates to a firm who is considering an expansion or a firm who is considering a new business investment into the regional market, know that there are a variety of market support partners within the Greater Albuquerque region that businesses can tap into for support, for networking opportunities, to be in an opportunity for some knowledge spillover in that regard and learn about the different opportunities that exist within the regional market within the context of the aerospace sector itself within private industry. So we'll pivot a little bit now and really look at the talent base. The talent base that works to support at large the aerospace sector. And as you can see, certainly over the past 5 years, strong job growth within occupations that go to support the aerospace sector. Certainly aerospace research and development is one function of the industry, but also the production, the manufacturing of components, the fabrication of equipment that works to support the aerospace sector at large, on top of the skilled computer and the skilled technical positions that go to support that. Noted in the paragraph on the left-hand side of the slide, the occupations in aggregate have expanded over 10% over the last 5 years and really work to support the job growth slide that was illustrated previously over the past decade. But more importantly, looking at now the presence of experienced personnel, the presence of the individuals with deep skill sets and concentrations of skills that can enhance the research and development sector and the aerospace sector at large here within the greater region. Certainly aerospace engineers, 2.5 times the national average. When we look at from a production perspective, those industrial engineering technicians, 4 times as concentrated regionally than they are within the nation. And the same is true for computer and information research scientists. So as we think about our specialization for aerospace as a region and the types of facilities that we can support with our workforce, it does us well to understand the concentration of the presence of those experienced personnel to support those facilities longer term. And thinking more specifically about our talent output and our ability as a region to provide a sustainable pipeline of talent to relevant facilities is of primary importance. So as you can see on this slide, as it relates to the presence of our student population and our graduate output, we graduated nearly 1,400 students within relevant programs in 2020 alone. Now, interestingly, almost half of those only took 2 years or less to complete. In terms of a work-ready pool of talent that a business can tap into quickly. Now, importantly, at the same time, 50% of those, 52% of those were more of the bachelor's and above degrees. So those forthcoming job seekers that might apply an engineering degree as an example to support an aerospace operation. And you can see the distribution down there to the bottom with a strong presence of both certifications and associate degrees, with 28% being bachelor's degrees themselves. And herein lies the importance of strong partnerships amongst our region's educational institutions. And so we're highlighting in this instance the unique output within the University of New Mexico itself. So out of the nearly 1,400 graduates that the market produced in 2020, UNM graduated 710 of those students. And you can see, as we would expect with a university asset, that 54% of these were bachelor degrees themselves, and 45% of these were master's degrees or above. Now, one very interesting asset that aligns nicely, perfectly to the aerospace sector at large is UNM's Cosmiac Center. This is an innovation research center housed at where we saw the density of business establishments earlier on. It's actually 15,000 square feet of innovation research space for clean rooms and laboratory space. So as the university itself continues to align and support the aerospace industry at large, they too are invested in innovation and collaboration and partnerships with government and business and other academic institutions in the same regard. And that's just the University of New Mexico, excuse me. In addition to the 4-year degree options that are more routinely produced by UNM themselves, also CNM, the Central New Mexico Community College itself, again, supporting nearly 600 of those completions and nearly inverse on, as we would expect, the certification and associate's degrees perspective. So employers have an opportunity to not only tap into a large volume of talent being produced, but talent that satisfies different requirements from an occupational perspective. And an interesting asset to highlight within CNM is their Advanced Technology Center. Again, aligning program deliverables to industry needs, the Advanced Technology Center is 80,000 square feet of state-of-the-art lab and classroom space. And uniquely aligned to the aerospace sectors, the aviation maintenance technology and the unmanned aircraft systems program help support individuals as they enter the workforce within aerospace operations from that entry point perspective. So we'll pivot now and look to the operating environment. And as I promised, I'll invite Grant to introduce some of those unique resources that we have for growth. And one of the really kind of interesting tactics that we can take as regional analysts is to say, what might be a hypothetical investment profile for which Greater Albuquerque is competitive for? And then how might that facility rank against a competitive set of other aerospace rich markets in the United States? And so in this example, we're looking at a Center for Aerospace Technology and Computer Systems Design. This firm will employ 80 people in the regional market and absorb 20,000 square feet of Class A office space. And then, as we all know, a firm doesn't employ simply one type of occupation. In fact, there's a staffing composition that exists across both, in this instance, the skilled computer and skilled technical, but then also the office and administrative and management roles that exist within the organization. And so what we worked to highlight in this instance is across both payroll and real estate costs within the regional market, how does Greater Albuquerque fare against some other regions nationwide? And you can see that we fare quite well. And as we introduced earlier on in the presentation, the growth dynamics that are happening in the market, in addition to the assets that both exist within the region and are also in close proximity to Greater Albuquerque, really position us as a market for both high quality at comparatively lower cost for a firm considering an investment in an aerospace operation within these markets nationwide. And as you can see, from a real estate cost perspective, nearly 50% less for Class A office space in Greater Albuquerque against the sample peer average. In addition, nearly just about 12.5% less from a payroll cost perspective that would work to support this facility over time. And just to add a little bit of recent market sentiment to the context of this discussion and this presentation, these projects themselves, these investment projects themselves, I thought were very interesting to highlight. And that one, they're all very recent, and two, the language that's used within the quotes themselves. As Albuquerque flourishes as a hub for advanced space technology initiatives, we need a highly skilled workforce, and we need it immediately. And Blue Halo offering the quote, "This represents a long-term commitment to New Mexico," and indeed Greater Albuquerque. And it shows within the data variables that we can see from a regional perspective and complements the narrative that we all know within the regional marketplace for aerospace.
Yeah, aerospace is the industry that we can really lead with talent. Sometimes it's possible that we're having to lead with incentives, but aerospace is not one of those. We certainly have the talent and skills to make, to create a really thriving environment, even more so than we've had for the past 40 years. So let me give kudos to Chad. He's been working with our team for several months now, and we could not be more pleased with the kind of skill set that he brings. As you've seen from this presentation so far, this really is informative for our ability to do lead generation. It's more informative for us to be able to really help the existing businesses in our area with all the different incentives that we have, really understanding better what are the costs of operation and really where we need to go with developing our talent base. So Chad, thanks so much for all that you've done so far.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that's an important thing, Grant, overall is, markets, regions are competitive for costs and quality factors. And so as we work to understand both the qualitative environment for certain types of investment opportunities, as well as the cost environment for certain types of facilities, in this instance, we're very well positioned. And that's really exciting to see.
Absolutely. And we're just going to have more fun.
That's right. So Grant, I know that, you had the opportunity to work specifically on some of these projects that are on the screen here. And I just love, and I think the audience would love some personal sentiment to, how was the process and having direct access to some of those decision makers, what was that balance of location cost and location quality?
I'll really just speak about Universal Hydrogen. They were really excited about the ability to have access to, the International Sunport, for them to be able to do their testing, for them to be able to serve their clients with relatively, affordable space. They're going to be doing new construction, but they saw right away the kind of support that they could gather together, starting with area as well as the city of Albuquerque, the Sunport, the aviation division, and that went all the way to the state, as well as our congressional delegation. They were all very instrumental in making this project happen, and I think that they were very moved by the ability of the state to really support them. And as you see in that quote there, they first of all were very pleased that they were going to have an affordable workforce with the skills that they needed, and where there might be any deficiencies, especially as they are innovating, they would be able to have a partnership with both CNM and UNM to to develop the talent and the skills needed to continue to be competitive in this new market of zero emissions transportation.
That's huge. That's huge. And it reinforces the importance of having education at the table and how they are at the table here for some of those very important investment conversations. Grant, I'm no longer controlling, but I believe we can go to the next slide. There we go.
Sure. We'll try to advance past this slide quickly. So again, Chad, fantastic job. Really thrilled by all that you're able to bring to the work that we're doing. And so on these incentives, we want to make sure that everybody understands that these incentives are for both existing businesses and those businesses that are interested in relocating to the Albuquerque region or expanding to it. So we can go into great detail on each one of these. It's very easy to spend 45 minutes to an hour speaking about incentives, but obviously for this discussion, I'm going to be going really high level. If you want to have a really rich discussion, please do contact me, and we can set up a meeting that would include area, any one of our local governments or several local governments, depending on where you're considering relocating to or expanding to, and state government. And all together, we are able to calculate what could be potential incentives for your for your project. Main things that we would need are your capital investment, essentially what you have budgeted for land, building, and equipment, the jobs retained and or net new jobs that go along with the project, and the wages that are associated with those jobs. So first, great, thank you very much for putting that in the chat. There's my contact information. So first, the industrial revenue bond. Essentially, this is a mechanism by which you abate or exempt property taxes. That would be on land and improvements, as well as equipment. This is an agreement that would be entered into with a local government. This is not something that would be transacted with the state of New Mexico. But essentially, if you purchase land, build a building, and then fill it with equipment, you would be able to have your tax liability on the real and personal property abated, and that could be for up to 30 years. Typically, the way that these work, between 67% and 95% of the tax liability is reduced or exempted. There is that difference known as payments in lieu of taxes. So it would be a small payment that would try to keep some of those taxing entities, such as the school district, whole. The Job Training Incentive Program, this is a program that since 1973 has been a top-ranked incentive, especially in the way of talent development. So for any net new jobs, at least 50% of those trainees' wages for up to 6 months can be reimbursed. This could be really huge for cash flow, and it's a program that a company can go back to so long as it's hiring new positions. So it is a program that is not just one time, it grows with the company. Really exciting to see what some of our aerospace companies have done. I've heard recently that Boeing, for one, has been to the JTIP board looking for training incentive dollars more than a dozen times. So it's just certainly something that grows with the company, and we're really excited that we've had such success with it for so long. Once a company is eligible for JTIP, they can also become eligible for the high wage jobs tax credit. So you see that the tax credit is 8.5% of salaries. The main takeaway for this particular tax credit is that it's the one that you want to figure into the tax liability last. So if the credit exceeds what is the remaining liability or the tax liability, that difference is cash in your company's pocket. So you would work with your CFO or your CPA and make sure that that is figured last as you're figuring tax liability. The manufacturing investment tax credit, companies no longer pay gross receipts or compensating tax on their equipment, but they are still eligible to get a tax credit that's equal to the compensating tax rate of 5.125%. On the single sales factor for manufacturers, a manufacturer is able to elect to have their sales or their sales in New Mexico to be considered for calculating their corporate income tax. Typically, for manufacturers that are exporting outside of the state, have very little in the way of sales in New Mexico. So that tax liability may be effectively zero. So something really important to keep in mind. We also do not have inventory tax, and that applies to any phase of production, and so that can be parts that are in process, not just finished products. We do not tax manufacturing equipment and those consumables that go into the manufacturing process. So that includes electricity, water, and natural gas. That can also include solvents, really anything that goes into the manufacturing process. That includes spare parts. the technology jobs and R&D tax credit, the really important thing to consider here is that it is a tax credit equal to 5%, and it's on any expense having to do with R&D. So if essentially 10% of your facility is used for R&D, anything that goes into that 10% of the facility is eligible for the tax credit. Same thing with employees. If an employee spends 50% of their time doing R&D, that tax credit also applies to that 50% of their time. And then lastly on this slide, we have the Local Economic Development Act. That is basically our shorthand for speaking about local and state government's ability to reimburse companies for expenses related to land, building, and infrastructure. This is typically the grant is discretionary, meaning that it's not statutory or formulaic. The local government or the state will look at a project, see if it's one that is highly desired. It will look at the number of jobs created, the wages applied to it, the benefits, as well as what might be local business or local sales, local purchases, excuse me, and in considering what would be that discretionary award. Next slide. And then, rather than going through each one of these, really the main point that I want you to take away is that, what are the sales from these particular activities that are listed in the headings. Those are able to be deducted from what would be the calculated gross receipts tax liability. And so we have really worked hard in the state of New Mexico to make sure that these activities really have a business environment in which to thrive. And I see that we had Rob Black from the State Chamber in with us today, and I know that he was instrumental in that directed energy systems gross receipts tax deduction. So there are areas in which this can really grow and make sure that we continue to have a really thriving environment for aerospace and those industries related to it. Next slide. Chad, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Well, there we go. Having those tools in the toolkit are extremely valuable when trying to close a deal. It's offering some intentionality around the industries that we want to grow long term. And there's certainly recognition that aerospace is one of those industries at the local level, at the regional level, and at the state level. So as always, we're coming up on time, but we really appreciate you all who were able to attend and listen in, and we offer an invitation to all of you and to all of you within your network to really help us better understand and build the strongest value proposition for aerospace that there can be within the United States itself. And so in that regard, you do see both Grant and my contact information on the slide. Please do not hesitate to ever reach out and ask questions or inquire about how we might be able to better think and better serve the aerospace industry here within the state and here within the Greater Albuquerque region. So with that, Grant, with your blessing, I think we can go ahead and close out. Thank you all for joining us today, and we will happily give you 5 minutes back of your time.
Thanks everyone for joining us.